You guys have to excuse me for a second, trying to get everything set up. We're in downtown Old San Juan. Open voice memo. I'm gonna record this one straight away. Open voice memo. Okay. All right. So, let's see. All right, here we are, guys. Finally, sorry about that. So, trying to get all of our technical stuff under control. We are coming to you live this week, downtown, or I should say Old San Juan, Puerto Rico. It has been one of the most beautiful times I have had in a really long time. Here for a wedding for a friend that I've known for a few years since moving to San Antonio, and we have had an incredible time since getting here a couple of days ago. But obviously, it's the weekend. We have our podcast that we need to do for you guys, and I could not think of a better place. I actually was really looking forward to doing a podcast here in Old San Juan. I wish you guys could see around me. There's a beautiful cathedral next to me. We have El Convento behind us. This is actually where the wedding is going to be for those of us that are watching on our video version of the podcast. For those that are listening, directly behind me is a beautiful building. El Convento is where we're having the wedding tomorrow. But I wanted to come to you guys and answer some more questions that we had that were posed on our Instagram page, and I wanted to address these. And we talked last week on last week's episode. There was, like I mentioned, there was a bunch of questions that were asked over this last week that I wanted to address, and I was really looking forward to getting to some of these questions because these are new questions, things that we typically will get repeat questions about things like mental blocks, certain skills like how do I get a back tuck that's better, how do I improve running tumbling, specific skills like round off back handsprings, connecting them. Very common questions that are asked that we love to answer they're kind of repeat questions, but this last week we actually had a bunch of new questions that were completely different than what we'd had before. So I was really excited to get to answer these. And so this week is a continuation of some of those great questions. So let's jump right in. First question was D1 versus D2, which is better? So again, D1, for those that aren't familiar with some of the terminology for the states, D1, D2, we're talking about gym sizes, okay? So certain, your D1 gyms, bigger gyms, D2 gyms, smaller gyms, and you have your D1, like certain competitions that are specific for each type. So you have your D1 Summit, D2 Summit, etc. So to be honest, when you look at a D1 versus D2 and you're talking about which one is better, it's really hard to say. You really can't use the size of the gym to determine the quality of the gym. There are programs out there that have a couple of teams, maybe 4 to 6 teams, but those teams are incredible, right? We're talking like top level programs, right? And then we also have large gyms that have feeder teams or entry level teams. So you may have a team with level 1s, your youngers, your minis, level 1s, level 2s, things like that. And especially this year with the new ranking system, there's up to level 7 now, right? So you really can't compare a D1 to a D program and ask which is better, because truly better comes down to your program, the quality of the program, the teams, what level competition you're going into, and how you're placing at your competition. So if you're a D2 gym and you're placing top of the top, or a D1 gym and you're placing bottom of the bottom, just because you're okay, perfect. So D1 versus D2 really doesn't matter. It's not which is better. It's more of, what size are you able to create a quality program. If you can do that with a large program like a D1, obviously that's the route you're going to want to go. But if you have a smaller gym and you can focus on just a handful of teams and make those teams top-notch teams, your program can be just as well known as some of the bigger ones. Second one is, how do we stop arching the back in stunts? So recently, we posted on Instagram and YouTube, we posted about 2 exercises that are geared towards improving bases posture and their stunting. So we had a lunge, we're both using bands. We had a lunge holding the bands in the front. We also had a lunge press overhead with the bands. So the entire idea of that is to create core stability, bracing the core, keeping the spine neutral, getting the legs into a place where we can bend in the knees versus arching in our back, and then from there pressing overhead. Okay, so honestly one of the easiest things to do is to educate our coaches. When you see a base that is doing a back arch where they're arching too far back, instead of allowing that, call them out. Call them out on that just as fast as you would call a top girl out that was in bad body position, right? We tend to look up a lot in our stunts. We don't look down at what's going on below. And so when we see bases that are arching their backs too far, that also takes away from the aesthetic of the stunt. So we have to train our coaches to have a watchful eye for when we see a base that's arching backwards really big, that is taking away from the aesthetics of that stunt, is also putting that base at a place where they can injure themselves. But we have to educate the coaches, because in the moment, our bases and our cheer athletes, they're not thinking about, is my back arching? All they're thinking about is what you've been yelling at them, not in a good way, obviously, in a constructive way, yelling at them about hitting the stunt, right? We're trying to hit these stunts. We just want it to hit. But sometimes we forget about arching of back, feet too wide, our arms overhead, or are they too much out in front of us? There's those little nuances that we kind of let slide as long as the stunt's hitting. And so if we have bases that are arching too much, we need to educate our coaches to be on the lookout for things like that, not just during stunting, but also just while athletes are standing around. If you walk into an all-star program and you're looking around these athletes, you see a lot of athletes that just stand with their back locked out. They kind of have their belly drop and their butt sticking out. It's that J-Lo posture that we've talked about 1,000 times. They just live there. So if we're not addressing it just at the core, the basic fundamental movement of just standing, then how can we expect them to do high skill activities like cheer, stunting, tumbling, etc., and all of a sudden make the switch then? We need to get into their brain that having a healthy position of the spine is important all the time, not just when they're stunting. So I would say, number one thing, educate your coaches. Make sure they're on the lookout, they're watching for when athletes have poor posture for their spine, because the more we let them do it in normal activities, the second we put them into a stressful position, they're going to revert to what feels normal, and that's standing with their belly sticking out and their butt sticking out. Last one, how to pull a full faster without piking down. So running fulls are a very common thing that we get asked about, or that we get videos for. Round off back handspring fulls. I feel like a lot of athletes rush into fulls before they're ready, because if you're doing a proper layout, then you shouldn't be piking at all in any of your running tumbling, because a proper layout is done with body straight, hollow body position, not piking out of it like we would on a whip. So if I see an athlete that's working on fulls and they're piking out of it, that tells me that likely there's a weakness or a fallout in their layout. And so I challenge the athletes and the coaches, if you have an athlete that's struggling with fulls, take them back to their layout and see, are they performing their layout perfectly? And if they are perfect, we skip ahead another big step. But I would wager a bet that if we took our athletes that struggle with fulls back to layouts just as a test, we would see a big fallout with their mechanics there. And a lot of it comes from the fact that when we're doing these new skills and we're looking to progress an athlete faster, we're trying to progress them as quickly as we can. And sometimes we let form go to the side versus it being a primary focus. So first of all, if you have an athlete that's struggling with fulls or piking out, take them back to the layout, watch their layout, make sure that their layout is beautiful, the big long set, big snap, early drive with the toes versus a late drive, which segues into part 2, and that they're landing and they're standing upright, not landing with their chest down. Secondly, and just like we touched on, if they're piking out, there's a big probability that they're not staying hollow, and that they're leaving their feet behind too long. So it becomes almost like a whip versus a layout. And so remember, when there's one move in running tumbling that we do where we drive the toes almost at the same time as the hands, and that is the layout. Because if we set and we leave the toes behind, we then have to whip the toes back over, and that becomes a whip, right? So as we're setting for our layout, we're almost driving the toes kind of at the same time, not as aggressively, but the toes should be traveling upwards as the body's rotating back. And then once we make it to inverted, where our head is below, we then snap, and that finishes our layout to where we're standing upright. So if we have an athlete that's piking out of a full, we take them back to layouts. If they are waiting to drive the toes over in the layout, their full is going to be piked all day long, because not only are we trying to get the toes over, sorry about the music, not only are we trying to get the toes over, we're trying to rotate as well. And that rotation, or that twisting, plus having to get the toes over late, is going to cause an aggressive pike to try to get the feet down before they land on their face. So if we're having an athlete, again, that's struggling with fulls, go back to the layout, watch the layout, and make sure that their layout is perfect, because it is part of our sport. Is we want fast progressions so that we can get faster and more high level skills, so that we can compete at higher levels, which is fine. But we have to remind our athletes that if you're able to progress at that speed, that's perfectly fine, as long as you're progressing properly. But when we hit a brick wall, we have to also say, okay, we're progressing faster than normal. You know, tumbling wise, think about gymnastics versus cheer. We progress a lot faster than gymnastics does, because our requirements are a lot less stringent. But we also have to humble ourselves and say, okay, we're moving at a faster pace. We hit a brick wall where we're now struggling at a skill, and it's okay to take a step back to clean up enough to then move forward. And sometimes our coaches and our athletes don't convey that message well. So when an athlete hits a brick wall, we go, man, they're really struggling with their full. And then you kind of 30,000 foot view, this athlete has only been tumbling for maybe 2 years, right? Or a year and a half. So it's okay that they're struggling on a full. Most times in other tumbling sports like gymnastics and things like that, they're not working towards full, so years and years and years. So we have to remind our athletes that, hey, we're letting you progress faster, and it's going to be okay if you hit a brick wall. We need to step back, find out why we're hitting the brick wall, and then we can move forward. So great questions again this week, guys. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. If you're on YouTube and you're watching this, subscribe below. If you're on your your podcast platform, if you haven't already subscribe to us, whether it's through Google Play Music or Spotify or iTunes or Anchor, etc. We'd love for you to follow us, just so you know you're up to date with our latest episodes. And again, just like we talked about last week, if you are a contributor to the podcast, thank you so much for your contributions to help us to make the show possible. If you haven't contributed and you would like to, if you go to anchor.com, anchor like a boat anchor, anchor.fm, like on the radio, anchor.fm/cheerleading. That is our podcast, and there's a place there where you can either do a one-time donation, you can become a monthly subscriber. I mean, even as much as 99 cents a month, paying $1 for our 4 podcasts a month, that little bitty bit helps us to, keep things like our microphones working. It helps us to buy better tripods, helps us to keep the camera working properly. It helps us to make things run a lot smoother. So thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week. We will post another question request on Instagram this coming week once I get back to the States, so that we can continue to answer. These questions have been absolutely fantastic. So I'm going to go enjoy Puerto Rico a little bit more. Thank you guys for joining us, and we'll catch you on the next episode.